the process is just as important as the end result. When I studied architecture, I studied it for a good 6 years or so and got all the way up to my master's in it. And when I was studying, one of the most basic lessons that we learned when I was still in my undergraduate was the definition of architecture. And when you listen to the definition of architecture, it's described as the process and the product of designing buildings. Right? If I can summarize it in like its most simple terms. There's a lot more technical aspects that are added to it, but it's the process and the product of designing buildings. So as a person does or goes through the process of designing buildings, the process that they follow is called architecture. The process of going from an idea through formulating that idea or developing that idea or concept into something realizable or tangible, and then actually producing outcomes or drawings, documentation, information that will enable that thing to be built. That whole process is architecture. But that's the outcome, the product of that, the building that's actually standing at the end of that, is also referred to as architecture. So the architecture, the definition of architecture refers to both the process and the product of designing or building buildings. I love applying the experience and the lessons from architecture to life and to the experience of building or the process of building important things that I work on and that I believe other people are working on. It's just the lens through which I see things, right? Building a life and a future that you want to build, building a career, building a business, building a ministry or a nonprofit. I think there's some lessons or principles that are part of the process or the architectural process that have been so significant to me in terms of understanding how to build things. And that definition is one of the most fundamental aspects, firstly in the experience, that the process is just as important as the product. So when we would present our schoolwork in architecture school, one of the things that we do if we're presenting, let's say, a project for designing a house or a school or a mixed-use development or whatever, we'd have to present the process that we followed to arrive at the design. So we'd have to present the site that we were in, right? The working that we were part of. We'd have to present the problems or the opportunities that exist on that site. We'd have to present our response to those opportunities or problems through a concept, right? What is an idea in response to that? Then we'd have to present how we develop that idea into formal or tangible results, right? Into a space that's defined by various, components of materials, of texture, of, structure, of form and shape, and et cetera, like various aspects that define that tangible thing. And then we'd have to produce outcomes that would enable that thing to be built, right? Whether it's through, specifications, drawings, plans, etc. So it's going from an idea to something that is buildable, and then presumably that thing would then eventually go on and be built, right? And even in the process of building it, there's design work that is going on, but that whole process is designing, right? There's a trial and error that's going through the process. But that process is as important. And so because that process is so important, we'd have to present the going through of that process to say, this is the idea, this is the problem I'm observing, this is how I'm developing this idea, this is how I'm arriving at the solution, this is and it's not always a linear process, there's a back and forth that's going on, there's a trial and error, there's experimentation, there's all of these things. But ultimately, it's a process that is followed, and that process has to be demonstrated because the process is just as important as the product. And this process was so important that if we didn't present the process, you would get marks deducted, right? So it'd be those who, they would rush to the end result, right? They would just say, okay, here's my building, here's my site, here's my building. And those students typically didn't do well because they didn't understand that the process matters just as much as the product. And so in as much as you've built this product, you have to also present to us the process because the process matters just as much as the product. And in fact, the process gives credibility to the product because when we'd see a building, we'd see, okay, there's this element on the building, right? Why is there this element? And you're able to point to the process to say, no, if you look at this journey that I followed, there's this part of the process that informs this decision. If you look at this element, maybe there's a specific color you chose, a certain material or whatever. The process informs the certain decisions that were made in the outcome or in the product. So much so that a person could look at a product or an outcome, but the value of the product was amplified by the richness of the process. So much so that if you had a rich process, you would typically get higher marks because of the fact that the process weighed just as much as the product in terms of the value and the richness that goes into the product, because both of them are architecture. Both of them are architecture. I spoke about applying this principle or this thought, to life and to, building various things. I think we all go through the experience of building various things, and we don't think ourselves to have made significant progress because we have not yet seen the outcomes, right, or the full product yet. Firstly, without realizing that the process is just as important as the product. That it's necessary and it's important to go through the process so that you can be able to arrive at the product, because the process is just as important as the product. In fact, the product, while it might exist as an end goal, sometimes when you're going through the process, you might not necessarily have a specific idea of how exactly the product will look, right? So you might have a picture, say, okay, I have a general idea, I have a concept, but you don't preempt what the product will be. So you go through the process, you experiment, you test, you try out things, and that actually produces the true clarity of what you want to produce in the outcome. Applying that to our individual lives and our presence, and I'll apply it in two ways. Firstly, in the area of goal setting. Individually, one can set goals. I set goals, you might set goals, say, look, this is what I want for my life, this is what I want for my career, this is what I want for my relationship, this is what I want for my future family, this is what I want for my, finances, my spiritual life, my health, etc. You might have this picture in mind, this ideal, right? And that ideal is calling out to you, it's inviting you to pursue it. The process is just as important as the product. That how you go about doing it offers us as much meaning as the product. And what does that process look like from an architectural point of view? And I'll recap this at the end. It's firstly understanding the site that one is operating in. So, okay, what are the conditions of the site? What exactly am I working with? What is the environment that this setting is in? What exactly am I looking at, right? What problem currently exists in between myself and achieving that goal, right? The site that I'm working with. What are my limitations? What are my strengths? What are my opportunities? What are the threats, etc., right? Site analysis. Then what are the opportunities that arise out of that site analysis? To say, okay, these are the strengths that I can work with. These are the weaknesses I need to work on. These are the opportunities that arise. And all of those factors then can inform what is the best solution forward, right? What is the best approach to try and pursue this end goal, right? And then that approach that you take is what you would call your concept, right? Your direction that you want to follow in resolving or in achieving that end goal, that concept. So this is the idea that I want to follow. This is the approach I want to take it in, right? This is the conceptual idea. So it's understanding the site, understanding the threats, opportunities, strengths, opportunity and weaknesses, etc. of the site, the conditions, and then deciding on an approach. Say, look, I'm going to attempt this direction conceptually. And then going through the process of actually carrying out to say, okay, what does this approach look like in this area, in that area, in this area? So it's going back to the architecture point of view. So if I'm having a concept of whatever idea I have, it's to ask yourself, what does that conceptually look like in terms of material, in terms of the shape, in terms of the structure, in terms of the space, right? All of those components are informed by this vision that you have, this end goal that you have, this mission statement or this concept that you have. And so that must inform all the actions that must be taken, right? And going back to the idea of goal setting, say, okay, the approach that I want to take, if I want to achieve this end goal, this is the approach I want to take. If it's to pursue a certain career, okay, I'm going to go through this line, this education, this. What does that look like in terms of every decision that I have to make, in terms of, my daily habits, in terms of the places I go to, the people I interact with, the resources I acquire, who I present myself as? That concept informs every decision. And then it's the process of just going about building that. And that's typically a long process. It's typically a messy process. That's why there's sketching that's involved, there's concept models, there's experimentation that's involved, all informed by this is the end goal that I have, and this is the process I want to follow. And ultimately, in the process of doing that, as you discipline yourself to consistently do so daily and consistently input the process and work on it, eventually it arrives at something visible and visual. Along the process, there's this thing that we do that's called critting, which is basically getting feedback to say, hey man, this is how far I am. What do you think about this? What do you think I can add? What do you think I can take away? With someone who's actually who's knowable, or who knows, or who's been to where you want to be, or who's experienced what you want to experience, or who's gone through the process before. But it's getting feedback from those who are wise, or from those who are even your counterparts or your peers, to say, how are you facing this problem? How are you experiencing this? That's part of the design process. And ultimately, through giving oneself a deadline, it can then produce something tangible. Say, okay, if I give myself 2 years to achieve this, or 1 year to achieve this, and work diligently towards that deadline, at the end of that deadline, one can then review after going through consistently, say, okay, this is something tangible that I need to have worked towards. And what does that look like? Remembering that the process is just as important as the product. Trying to build various things as well, building a business, building a book, building a product, etc., etc. I try to always apply that thinking, that line. The process is no less different, and the process matters just as much. Maybe it's an encouragement to a person who might be building something or might have an end goal in mind, to remember that the process matters just as much as the product. And so value the process. There's this quote that some people like saying, and I don't like it for personal reasons, when they say, trust the process. It's difficult to trust the process, and that's the only reason why I don't like it. But the process matters just as much as the product, because architecture, or the value, is just as much in the product as in the process. Something to think about when it comes to the things that we're building: our relationships, our families, our businesses, our careers, our work, our lives. Examine the process that needs to be followed, the conditions that you have to face, the concept that you have in mind, the vision that will dictate every other action of life. The emphasis is that the process matters just as much as the product. Hope that's been valuable to you. Maybe you can share a thought as well. But looking forward to catching each other on the other side. All the best and much love.